When I talked to Brendan Schulman from DJI, it became very apparent to me that I had not, in fact, thought about the FAA as a group of people. I thought of them more as a kind of monstrous organization that was reaching out to take my flying robots from me and also ruin my fun. But as I talked to Brendan, it became very apparent that perhaps I should consider them as people. And maybe the motives that they have are not as monstrous as just saying no. Maybe there were reasons behind some of the things that they were thinking, and there were reasons that perhaps I didn't understand. So with Brendan's help, I was able to get put in contact with the director of the drone division of the FAA, who then put me in contact with Kevin Morris, who we are speaking with today. Kevin's a great guy. First time I talked to him, I was like, oh, I like this guy, man. I'd like to hang out with him. Maybe, go throw some steaks on the grill or something. And so I set out to talk to him to find out more about the thinking and the things that move the FAA. I think an important thing for me to call out here is that in order to have a good conversation with Kevin, I submitted all of my questions beforehand, which is something I do not normally do. And I think the thing that's important for you to note here is that I submitted all of my questions, they approved all of them, and I asked all of them. While they do technically have editorial control over this process, which I will note is something I give all of my guests, they have not exercised it. They have allowed the interview to go out as is. There are no cuts. So you get to see Kevin answering in real time as he did when I was speaking with him. I thoroughly enjoyed this interview. It is often very good to get a little bit outside of your own perspective to hear what other people think. And I really want to thank Kevin. I want to thank the FAA, and I want to thank the folks that helped Kevin as well. It was really good to speak with him. I feel like I walked away with much more clarity than I had had before. Last note, I fully expect that this one is going to be a lightning rod, that there will be people that will never be satisfied with any answer that comes from the FAA. That's fine. You are more than welcome to take as many shots as you want in the comments section. It's going to be all right. We're all big boys and girls, and we can deal with it. But I will say, for those of you that are open to being satisfied by some of his answers, it's good to kind of take a moment and just think about it. Think about the things he says. I don't find any of them particularly egregious, and very few are onerous. So give it a shot, see what happens, and I hope that you all enjoy it. Catch you guys on the flip side. Bye. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Michael Rollins Show, and I have a special one for you today. I bring you Kevin Morris, who is the UAS coordinator for the FAA's Office of Communication. And we are here today to hear from the mouth of the regulation agency what they think about what we do in FPV and how we could help each other effectively. So thank you for coming on, Kevin.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate for having me on, Mike. This is a really exciting time, I think, for drones in general, but to be able to connect with you and members of your community is just something really special, and I appreciate the opportunity.
And I really appreciate you coming on. This has been an interesting process getting to this point, and I'm actually very glad that we're here. So as we get started, I don't know if you're aware. The FPV community in general is very distrustful of the FAA. There is perhaps a feeling of, you can take my drone out of my cold, dead hands. very, very often in the FPV community. And while I do kind of understand that, I think some of it may come from not only just a general combativeness and non-compliance that is pretty typical in the FPV community. That's kind of our personality, but also from maybe some misunderstandings about what the FAA is trying to do and what their goals are. So I wanted to start out with a set of questions that I'm basically loosely calling, why should we trust you? Why do you have our best interests at heart? So I think let's start out with you. What's your history with the hobby of model aircraft in general and FPV specifically?
Sure. So I let me start off first by saying I personally and the FAA as a whole are very aware of how the FPV community right now feels about certain things that the FAA is doing. Make no mistake about it. We've seen it on social media. We've seen it in our meetings. I think we'll talk maybe a little bit later on about how we've worked with the FPV community on various projects. But rest assured, we're very aware. But to get your specific question, I actually grew up flying RC controlled aircraft. I lived right next door to a gentleman who built these and would take me out because I've been interested in aviation forever, and he would take me out to the flying fields. There's the little RC controlled flying fields. Now I'm old, so I'm talking here back in the early 80s when I did this. But we'd fly aircraft, and I thought it was absolutely fascinating. Just the controlling the aircraft flying around, it was really special. And I think you would agree, Mike, really sparks the interest in aviation. A young person getting a hold of, nowadays a drone, but even back then an RC controlled airplane just really kindles that fire. And I've had that throughout my entire life. I didn't really start getting, I guess, noticing, more is the appropriate word, the FPV community until maybe the last 5-6 years. So as far as the FPV goes, I haven't personally done a lot of FPV flying. I don't know how you guys do it, quite honestly, without getting some vertigo, lots of practice. But I've been to events like the Drone Racing League and seen those types of activities on TV, and it is absolutely fascinating. I have 2 young boys, and when those events are on TV, they stay glued to it. So it's something that I find fascinating, interesting. I've participated in RC aircraft before, and I can fly drones today, just like most people have a drone and fly it around.
Now, have you been in the goggles before?
I have not put on the goggles, and that's to me. So a little bit of my background, I was an airline pilot for a while before coming to the FAA. So a part of me is wondering, how would that look? How, I would compare it immediately to my days of flying aircraft, and how would that relate, and would it be identical? Yeah. I don't think it would even be close to what I did back when I was flying the aircraft.
It is. What I will say is that, you talk about having vertigo and whatnot, and there can be moments like that. But because it so occludes the outside world, because the only thing you see is what that camera sees, I will just say it's a wild experience. And so, a question for you is, if there was a way that we could help you experience FPV, would you be willing to do it? Whether that means you meet somebody somewhere with a set of goggles and get to ride along. Is that something you would ever be interested in?
Absolutely. And I could tell you too, Mike, I would not be the only person in the FAA that would take somebody like you or other experts up on that offer if we have the chance and the time to go out and experience what you guys do. I think it would be maybe, no pun intended, but eye-opening for me to put on the goggles and experience that even as a ride along. I think that would be really fascinating.
Yeah, and it's actually something I've thought about, because I'm actually pretty close to DC. I mean, depending on traffic, it can be 3 hours or 12. But yeah, the DC, Virginia Beach to DC traffic is notoriously bad.
But I'm about a 3-hour flight away from DC. Well, maybe 2.5 hours. I'm in Minnesota, but I would gladly meet you out there to do that.
Sure. Maybe after this, we can try to set up some time where myself and some of the other local pilots could meet y'all somewhere that it is very legal to fly.
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, and none of us would end up breaking any laws or regulations. I feel like that would probably be, yeah. So building dives are out. I'm just gonna say.
We're not going to do it on the National Mall. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no, I don't feel like footing that bill or the jail time. So, it was funny because one of the things, when we had our prior conversation to kind of set this up, you made this really funny comment that I really appreciated. And so I went ahead and threw this in as a question, which is, when you wake up in the morning, do your feet hit the floor and you think, yes, I get to put another regulation in place to make people's lives harder? I mean, is that your goal? You know, does that goal start as soon as your feet hit the floor, or maybe after your first cup of coffee? Or
maybe it starts with indoctrination and FAA training. No,
right.
I could tell you unequivocally and absolute that we do not wake up in the morning hoping to make more regulations. It's actually the opposite. We really hope when we wake up in the morning that we are not directed to, and I think that's a key word there, to make more regulations. Making more regulations is not fun. It's not fun for the end users such as yourself. It's certainly not fun for us here at the FAA to try to work through that process. The sort of tongue-in-cheek comment about rulemaking around here is if you've never done rulemaking in the FAA, you'll do it once and you'll probably never do it again. It is a monumental workload. And I think I'll just make one comment. I know we're going to talk about it later, but if you take a look at that remote ID rule, we had to sift through over 53,000 comments on that rulemaking team. So it's not an easy lift. It's not something we look forward to, nor do we want to do. What we want to do, because again, many of us actually are out there operating drones, and a lot of us do fly FPV, just like you folks do. We want to just make sure it's safe and that we can all figure out a pathway forward that meets that goal of safety.
So there's actually an additional question I want to hit here, and I honestly don't know if it's in the questions I sent you, but you shouldn't have a problem with it, which is, where does the mandate come from? Because, you know, is the FAA sitting there thinking, well, these drones are dangerous and I feel like we should do something about it? Like, where does the mandate that gives you the authority come from?
Sure. I will say, just to preface this answer with, our goal is and always has been to integrate drones, not exclude, not segregate, not force you folks out into a corner somewhere where you can only fly in one particular spot. Our goal is to integrate you into the national airspace system. And that airspace system is shared with a lot of different users. Our authority to make those rules comes from Congress. The FAA doesn't get up in the morning like we were just talking about, nor does it sit around trying to think of new rules that we can put out there to restrict hobby or business or commercial use of drones. What typically happens is Congress becomes aware of something, and then they have a lot of discussions on that topic, and then a bill is proposed, it's signed into law, and that law then requires the FAA to enact regulations based on the statutory requirements. And I think you can look at Section 44809 as an Exhibit A for how that system works. Congress made those laws. It required the FAA to do a lot of different things, like develop the aeronautical knowledge and safety tests that we call the trust. So that's where our authority comes from. But yeah, rest assured, we don't sit around trying to figure out new ways to make rules.
Okay. When we talk about FPV specifically, it is a very niche hobby / industry. And what's interesting, I know for me, is watching how all of a sudden it's becoming integrated, pretty heavily into things like commercials and very unique shots that, cinematographers would have needed, tens of thousands of dollars worth of equipment to be able to do. But how does the FAA, what is the FAA doing to hold the interests of FPV, close? Like, are y'all out there intentionally trying to keep FPV flyers in the air?
So let me try to answer that one this way. I think FPV is, I would say, you're borderline being niche, right? I would say what you just described, Mike, and how FPV drone operations are being used and what they're being expanded towards. I think FPV is really starting to cross into mainstream. I don't think you guys are all out there rebels, this small group of people doing this really cool thing. My opinion is that it's really picking up. And I see that you're going to have more and more FPV operations. We're not just talking about, things like the Drone Racing League, but we're talking about infrastructure inspections, different things that FPV really lends its talents to. I think that's just going to grow. And as that grows, FPV moves away from I don't know if you called yourselves rebels or how you reference yourself a little bit, but that sort of that attitude that we're kind of doing something different, I think becomes more, this is really a mainstream function of an aviation industry, FPV drone operations. In that vein, we reach out and coordinate a lot with different groups in the industry on certain things like FPV. So we've worked with different modeling organizations. For example, the FPV Freedom Coalition, for example, was part of our industry cohort to develop the recreational UAS safety test. We've partnered with the Drone Racing League and our Partnership for Safety program to figure out what really works with FPV. How do we support, enhance, and grow this hobby of drone racing and FPV type flying operations and events? So we are reaching out to that community. We are trying to work with that community, again, to have the shared goal of reaching normalized FPV operations that are safe and share the airspace with everyone.
Okay, that's good to know. I know that, and I agree. I think it is changing. I think that, and it's interesting because I've done some drone work for cinematography and things like that, a few music videos, and it's very interesting to sit next to a director as you're getting the shot, and they're just delighted. They're, oh my God, this is amazing. Getting these, pull away dolly shots in, a lot of times inside, where afterwards the gentleman that I was working with, he was like, we could have never done that, 10, 15 years ago. And so it does definitely lead to very interesting perspectives. But it's interesting to hear from your perspective that we're entering the mainstream, because
I think you can even just, I'm sorry, Mike. I think you even look at television commercials. I mean, it went from never seeing drone type shots and imagery to seeing that in almost every commercial now. You can see a panoramic shot or a fly through or something where you as a drone flyer, instantly know that's a drone shot, right? You see that type of flying, either it's the stability or the way it pans. Yeah. To me, I see those in almost every commercial now. So that just goes back to my, I think you guys are very much moving into mainstream operations in terms of sharing our airspace and being part of the aviation industry.
Yeah, I think one of the funnest moments for me was when Apple gave their keynote recently, and they had these transitions, and they were a little bit different for them. And as I'm sitting there watching one of them, I'm like, oh man, who did the drone work? Who did it? I bounced out to Facebook. I was like, y'all, who did the drone work for the Apple stuff? And eventually I found the two pilots, and I think I was friends with one of them. I mean, it was really funny. So all right, so let's move on to compliance and safety. And there's a lot of rules that are very interesting, and I'm going to start with everybody's favorite. Why 250 grams? Where did that number come from? Is it really safe? And what does safe mean?
So great question, and one that's asked fairly often when we do these types of events. The 250 grams is based on an injury impact assessment that was done during the registration requirement and rulemaking. So if you have some time and you're quite frankly really bored, you can read the rule, the final rule on registration of aircraft, which includes drones, and has a lot of information on why that was in there. Now, there's a lot of technical speak, and I'm not going to pretend to be an engineer or somebody that's designing these kinetic impact tests, but I know that they looked at drone impact rates from 50 feet, and they based those requirements on those types of impact and injury severity from that altitude for those drones at various weights. And that's how they came up with the 250 grams. And when we're talking about that weight requirement, we're really talking about more or less under 44809 for recreational flyers, a requirement to register, right? If your drone weighs 0.55 pounds or under 250 grams or less, then you do not need to register. When we talk about Part 107, yeah, there you go, right? When we talk about Part 107, I'm sorry, what was that?
I said that's my sub 250 drone.
Yeah, there you go.
It weighs in at like 249.9 grams actually.
There you go.
It's
So
just under.
that's really cool. So if we talk
Mhm,
about that drone,
mhm,
flown recreationally under 44809, you do not need to register that drone, right? It
mhm,
weighs less than 250 grams. If you were going to fly it under Part 107, weight is not a factor. It would be required to be registered. And then also, you're talking nowadays about ops over people.
mhm,
So sub 250-gram drones are category 1 drones for all intents and
mhm,
purposes, and can fly over people now without a waiver, as long as you're in compliance with all the rules. So that 250-gram weight limit, it really means a couple of things nowadays. One, a requirement to register for Section 44809 or
mhm,
recreational flyers.
mhm.
And the other is the ability to perhaps fall into category 1 for ops over people under Part 107.
Okay. So I'm going to actually ask this question. Um, if is there a weight limit when operating over people? Is that also 250 grams, or is that just also the place at which you've got to have a registration?
So just so everybody is on the same page here, when we're talking about operations over people, we're talking about Part 107, right?
Okay.
Section
Okay.
44809, the rec flyer stuff, that's a little bit
Mhm,
different conversation, but let's stay in the Part 107 vein here for this
mhm,
discussion. There are 4 different categories of drones. Regardless of what category you fly, the rule itself, Part 107, requires that the maximum takeoff weight of that drone is under 55 pounds, right? Part
okay.
107 is the small UAS under 55-pound rule. So
Mhm,
that's sort of your upper limit starting point, if you
mhm,
will, as we come down the scale. Now, when you get into category 3 and category 2, there are weight limits on drones, but it more is tied to the kinetic energy impact of that drone.
mhm,
So I don't believe we say a specific weight for
mhm,
category 2 or 3, but we do reference impact and impact force. So
mhm,
obviously, a drone that weighs 1 pound versus a drone that weighs 48 pounds are going to have different impact forces from
mhm.
altitude, right? So that does play into it a little bit, but a specific weight itself under Part 107 is only identified for category 1 drones, and that's
Mhm.
0.55 pounds or less.
Um, one of the questions that's come up a lot, especially with friends like our friend uh, Bruce Simpson. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of interacting with him, but
I
he's
feel like we've had a couple of social media engagements back and forth.
I'm sure you have. He's a wonderful person. He's a little bit fiery, somewhat passionate.
That's
Um,
okay.
yeah, and it's interesting. He's actually a New Zealander, but he does keep a very interesting look on just the drone and model aviation industry in general. One of the things he has pointed out multiple times is that we have very few adverse interactions with drones. Period. And but something you just said has made me curious, which is, you said, I think, what was it, 50 feet, and the weight and the interaction with, say, a person on the ground. Um, is that based on modeling, like, mathematical modeling, or is that based on actual adverse interactions between, drone flyers and people on the ground?
So I'd have to reference back to
Okay.
that rule. I'm not totally certain whether or not it was a mathematical model or an actual flight test performed. I'm assuming they didn't put a human being down there and
Right.
drawn into them, but
Yeah.
I know that there have been different tests done with equipment that replicates human
Mhm,
skin, flesh,
mhm.
things like that. So I know there's been those types of tests done. As for that rule itself, I don't know if it was a mathematical component or if it was an actual physical test that was done, but that
Okay.
would be described in the final rule for the
Mhm.
registration piece.
How many, to your knowledge, have there been very many adverse interactions between drones and other things, whether that be a person or an aircraft? Because I feel like the perspective from the FPV community is that, number one, most of us are incredibly safe. There's a very big push, and I have seen people come down on very heavily when they've done something so blatantly stupid or so blatantly dangerous, that there's a lot of people that will send the smack down, if you will. But in the media, there's a lot of hysteria around drones, drones, drones. But at the same time, there's really, so far as I can see, only, a handful, maybe two handfuls of actual interactions between, say, drones and other aircraft or drones and people. Do you know of any or a few?
Yeah. So when we're talking about drone, we'll just call them drone incidents. And when I say
Okay.
incidents, it's going to capture everything you just mentioned there.
Sounds good.
Drone sightings have been relatively steady, and they sort of go up and down with the flying season, if you will. More people fly in the summer than they do in the winter, right? So drone sightings by other aircraft have been fairly steady. Now, I know there's arguments made, and I'm sure when people see this, the comment thread will go hot on your YouTube video where, they're not seeing drones, they're seeing, balloons, and, everything looks like a drone. And yeah, I get that. And there's definitely some truth to that maybe they didn't see a drone and that wasn't a drone. It could have been a bird or something like that. And I don't want to belabor that point, but just in general, more people are flying drones. So it's basically a relationship that if more people fly, more people are going to see them. So while maybe not every single drone sighting is a drone sighting, there are certainly more drones out there being spotted by aircraft, maybe in areas that they don't want them to be than before. So the drone sightings are up a little bit. In terms of actual incidents where we're talking about collision with aircraft, there have been some. There was one that was an Army Black Hawk helicopter in New York a number of years ago. So it's not to say that there hasn't been any, but there also hasn't been a lot. Okay. And so I think there are two avenues to look at that. There's one saying there hasn't been a lot, so we're doing everything right. And the other one is there hasn't been a lot, we've been pretty lucky. So I think somewhere in the middle is the right answer for that. We don't want to completely just say, since there's never been, there never will be. Right. And we can't really say there's going to be no matter what. So we have to meet somewhere in the middle on these drone incidents. So what we try to do is we try to look at our statistics, our ratios, our data that's coming in. Not everybody reports drone incidents. There are certain required reporting under Part 107 for sure, but I think the vast majority of people flying drones are flying them recreationally, not under Part 107. So in that regard, there is no requirement to report that your drone flew away or you had a lost communication link with your drone and went out to sea somewhere and you never got it back. That when that happens, your first instinct isn't to pick up the phone and call the FAA and say, guess what I just did with my drone. So I think there are a lot of events that don't go reported, but fortunately, NASA, and this is going to sound a little bit strange, but there is a tie in here. NASA just opened up their aviation safety reporting system to all drone operators. And what that system does is allow people to submit an anonymous report to NASA that they catalog in terms of collecting data, like what happened, what did you do? And then they share that information that the FAA cannot use for any enforcement purposes. And I can attest to you that we have not, because I was an inspector before I joined the Office of Communications, and I was involved with incidents that had NASA reports attached to them. But they send out newsletters with information on here's what somebody did with their drone. And in pilots, whether you're a manned aircraft pilot or traditional aircraft pilot or you're a drone pilot, we like to learn from other people's mistakes. It always makes us feel good when we read an article and we say, oh, that idiot, I can't believe they did that. I would never do that. Well, that person didn't think that they would do that either, right? But we share this information we learn. So the Aviation Safety Reporting System, which is run and operated by NASA, not the FAA, is a great anonymous reporting tool for those types of events. So we try to look at the whole picture and then determine what do we have going on here? Where do we need to do education? Where do we need to do outreach? But before I stop talking, and I know I've gone on a little while here.
You're fine.
I did want to go back to one of the very first things you said in this question, which you talked about how the FPV community, you didn't say this, but polices themselves in a way.
They do. That's correct.
Right. So they're out there. That is wonderful to hear, because that actually is called a safety culture in FAA speak. A safety culture within an organization is something that implores their members to work with each other, to call out unsafe operations, to fix problems, to look at the root, so all of that is what we need to do as not just FPV community, but as an aviation community as a whole, to work forward to keep those incidents low. The more safety culture and more robust safety culture we have, the fewer incidents we see, the fewer incidents, the less media has to talk about, the less media has to talk about, the less Congress gets interested. And then, of course, the less Congress is interested, the fewer rules we're required to make.
Okay. I would like to just speak to the FPV community in general. That means we are doing something that the FAA likes, and we probably should continue, but let's not just stop because they like it. Because,
Yeah, and I'll put one clarification. A safety culture or sort of self-policing doesn't mean you're ratting out your fellow FPV flyers every chance you get, because that doesn't really solve the problem.
Mhm.
It's outreach, it's education, it's cooperation, it's helping others understand not only this is the right way to do it, but this is
Mhm.
why we do it that way. So that's really what you want your safety culture to be. And it sounds like the FPV has a native
Mhm.
grassroots safety culture that's growing, which is great to hear.
What's interesting about that is here recently, I've seen, in social media, a lot of posts about y'all, you got to do your pre-flight checks. And normally it is, I didn't do my pre-flight check. And this was the result. And I know for me, a lot of times I fly over, say, the ocean, or recently I was in West Virginia and I was going to go fly over the New River Gorge. And ended up canning the New River Gorge flight because my pre-flight safety check showed me that I had, a broken prop. And it was this small, and it was a sub 250, but that prop would have disintegrated midair over, a drop of 1,000 feet. And so it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, this is actually beneficial for, my equipment, but also for safety. So, one thing I do also want to comment on is, you talked about drones flying away. And there was a joke for multiple years running, and I'm not sure if it still is, but Christmas is National Drone Flyaway Day, where grandpa and dad get a drone, and the first thing they do is charge the batteries, and then they go out, and that's the last time they fly it.
I like that. Can I use that? I'll give
You
you credit.
absolutely, yeah, you absolutely may. Even for me, my own dad did something similar one time. He had gotten this, it was like a little SEMA, as a brushed motor, and and he lives in the middle of eastern North Carolina. There's nothing around. And so he went out, he got his drone, he went out, he was so excited. He did a couple small flights and then charged the batteries again. And then he came back out and it had a camera. And so he really wanted to see what this property over around the corner was doing. So he started taking it up high, but what he didn't realize was that there was a really stiff cross breeze right over the trees. And so as soon as he got over the trees, his drone just went pew! And he is pretty certain that it landed in the woods across the street from them, and he went looking for it and then realized that it was getting towards dusk and there's bear in those woods, and he didn't have his pistol on him. So he was like, I'm leaving, I'll just let the drone be.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
super funny. So let's see. One of the things that Brendan Schulman from DJI talked about, which I thought was very interesting, is that an ounce of compliance goes a very long way to stopping future regulation. Can you kind of speak to that in general?
Yeah, I think it's a great transition, because that was sort of how I trailed off there on my last answer to you, when I sort of laid out that breadcrumb trail from,
Mm-hmm.
how do we stop more regulations coming which require more compliance. I absolutely agree with that. Just the little bit of work, even you describing your pre-flight assessment prior to your flight, where you scrapped the flight because of what you found, some damage to your rotor blades. So those pre-flight and, quite frankly, post-flight inspections
Mm-hmm.
are great resources for drone pilots to use to make sure that they're going to do things the right way and be safe when that happens. Because we really do not try, and I know people will disagree with this statement, but we really do not try to over-regulate. What we try to do is find that pathway that doesn't eliminate anyone, that doesn't favor anyone, but the end result of that pathway is always safety. How do we get to the end zone, which is going to be our goal of safety? And we do that through regulations. And so I think what you saw, we've seen this in Part 107, right? When Part 107 rolled out, if you wanted to fly over people, or even if you wanted to fly at night, you had to go get a waiver. And that was a process to get through for a lot of people. Despite our best efforts to try to make it as simple as possible, it was confusing for people. It was troublesome. They were getting rejections, and a lot of people got really frustrated at, well, once we started to take a look at the drone operations over the past 3-4 years, specifically with operating over people and with operating at night, we were able to show that there was a lot of compliance with the rules out there. We were able to show that there was a lot of compliance with the waivers that we did issue. And based on that ounce of compliance, we've opened up the rule. We actually made it less restrictive in this latest rulemaking, which we call the Ops Over People rule, in particular with flying at night. You do not need a waiver to fly at night any longer.
Okay.
In fact, we use something called performance-based rulemaking in that rule, which is we don't specify what type of light, and in terms of lumens or anything like that, or intensity. We don't get any of the nitty-gritty details. What we say is, drone flyer, you need to have a strobe or a flashing light on your drone. It's got to be visible for 3 miles. How you meet that requirement, it's up to you. There are a lot of different ways to get to the end zone on that. As long as it meets the intent of that rule, you're good to go. And I think what you're seeing is that as we continue, hopefully, with these ounces of compliance that are out there, you're going to see the regulations change to reflect that behavior. We see that with operations over people. We see that with operating at night. And soon, in government terms, soon, you're probably going to see that with beyond visual line of sight operations. We just recently formed an aviation rulemaking committee to take a look at normalizing beyond visual line of flight operations. So how do we get to the point where we can look at BV loss the same way we look at night today? That's what we're trying to get to. That's what we're striving towards. And those, as you put it, or as Brendan put it, the ounces of compliance are what get us there.
Yeah, and I think the beyond the BVLOS, which by the way, it is LOS. I know the government pronounces it loss. I did some government contracting for quite a while, and it was always very interesting for me how government agencies tend to turn acronyms into words. So
we specialize in that. I think we have an entire department devoted to that at the FAA.
I worked for the Joint Forces Command over in Suffolk for a while, and you would maybe initially look at it and pronounce it JFCOM. It was in fact JIFCOM, which is like, okay, guys, all right, Jif, peanut butter, and okay, I'm with you. Let's keep going. So the RID was the RID requirement was a super contentious one, and I think it still is to a degree. And there were a lot of things that got walked back from the initial proposal. So there was the requirement for a constant connection. I also believe that the requirement that the RID device had to be made by a specific, approved manufacturer, that it could not be tampered with, et cetera, et cetera. Were those changes made because they were too onerous on the pilot, or were those changes made because there's just not the technological infrastructure to support them, and as a result, they may come back later?
So, well, I can't offer opinion on what might come back later in the future or something like that. But I think the best way for me to answer that would be a little bit of both. So let me expand on that slightly. When we put out the notice of proposed rulemaking for Mode ID, and we touched on this earlier, so I'm glad we're back on it. We received a fair amount of comments. I don't have the exact total number, but I can tell you it was over 53,000. And that alone shows the passion and engagement that the drone community has, not just FPV, but every type of drone operator out there. Remember that the remote ID really only affects drones. So those 53,000 plus comments came from the drone community, which is outstanding. Made a lot of work for us, but nonetheless, that feedback is what we needed from the community. And so what we did is, when we reviewed that feedback, there were a lot of comments in there that led us to think, well, we didn't think of that issue on that particular element of the rule. So maybe that's not going to work out like we'd originally thought it was going to work out. So did the rule change because we couldn't technically meet the requirements that we were proposing? Not necessarily, but I think the rule changed because of the comments we got back from you and others in the industry that said, hey, I don't think this is going to work like you think it's going to work. And that gave us a moment to pause and say, okay, let's remove the network requirement. Let's remove the cell tower connection requirement, because that's just, it's not going to work like we originally thought. Overwhelmingly, the comments were against it in the feedback for that rule. So that particular rule, although as you put it, Mike, still is not popular with a lot of people, I do think really emphasizes that the FAA listens. We put a rule out there. There's a reason we have that rule, so we can't just simply say, well, we're not going to do it. We need to have that rule, but how that rule is implemented is based on the feedback from you folks in industry. And I think that's a very good story. That you guys do have a voice, it is heard, and it does affect change within the FAA.
Okay, that's actually very good to hear. I know myself that I looked through quite a few of those comments, and there were definitely some comments that were not polite. We're possibly somewhat rude, but it was very interesting to look through and actually see quite a large number of cogent responses that were just good and well thought out. And so,
yeah, I do also, I just want to take the opportunity to thank you, your subscribers, anybody who might be seeing this, for taking the time on that rule to put in your well thought out comments. Right now, depending on when this video airs, we still have a few days left for the advisory circular on recreational flying, which includes community-based organizations, safety guidelines. That is open until August 9th of 2021. And we're seeking your comments on that as well. So for the same type of purposes. Now, this isn't a rule. It's not as nearly as onerous as trying to go through that remote ID rule, but it's something I think you and your subscribers may be interested in reviewing and providing comments on. Again, we really try to have that transparency in the process so that you have the opportunity to read what we're proposing or how we're going to do something, and then rely on your expertise and your comments to change it or substantiate it.
okay, yeah, I think I might be able to put something out. I was actually not aware of that, so
Yeah.
I'm gonna go check it out.
You do follow us on social media, do you not?
Of course. Yeah. Where's my phone?
Yeah. So I shameless plug right now. Sorry. If you haven't, please do follow us on our social media accounts. We have 2 accounts that are dedicated to drones. We have a Drone Zone Twitter account. We have a Drone Zone Facebook account. And all of these announcements go out. So anything that's happening in the FAA, anything that's coming down the pipe that we want to make sure everybody's aware of, anytime we need your help or looking for comments, that is where you're going to see that information first and easiest.
Okay, that's a good one. Just I'm going to throw you a fantastic idea, which everybody does for me, and I implement 100% of them, obviously. You guys should definitely start an Instagram account and then populate it with short 1-minute videos of FAA people getting to ride along in FPV for the first time. I feel like that would actually be pretty fantastic, especially for the folks who get really motion sick.
I have a feeling there'd be quite a few memes coming out of that Instagram.
Oh man, yeah, you're probably right. You should protect the innocent. So, okay, this is the last safety question. And we've spoken a lot about how do we protect the people from the drones, right? But there's actually not been a huge amount of emphasis put on how do you protect the drone pilots from the people. There's the thing that really brought this to my attention was a story. Now I read this on Facebook. It could be just straight up disinformation. I was never able to really confirm that it happened. But the story is basically that there was a gentleman flying out on the edge of a national park in Colorado. And he was also flying adjacent to a landowner's property. And the landowner saw the drone, did not like it, and apparently this gentleman was assaulted very severely. Not only lost the drone, but ultimately ended up having to go to the hospital for, I believe, broken bones. So, with the remote ID and with this idea that, okay, well, as it stands right now, you're going to have to broadcast the location of the pilot. What is being done to promote the safety of the pilot, right? Because it's not just the drone that's dangerous. It's the people that the drone may be flying over as well.
Right. That is a concern. First of all, it's a terrible story to hear something like that. My heart goes out to that individual and anybody that's been attacked in that manner. It's really a shame that that happens. But I'm glad you asked this because it's certainly something that's on a lot of people's mind. This is in fact brought up at the most recent Drone Advisory Committee meeting that we had a couple of months ago, and how are we looking at handling this? So from a legal standpoint, when something terrible and tragic like this happens, where somebody's assaulted physically or threatened or anything like that, that's well outside the scope of the FAA to conduct any sort of enforcement or action. We're talking about criminal charges, and that is something that police departments, sheriffs, law enforcement are keenly trained to handle, engage, and respond to. So my recommendation is for anyone that's in a situation like that, try to de-escalate it, but call the police. Have them there to help you out, because as much as I can sympathize or empathize, I should say, with you, the FAA can't do anything in those situations. So what are some of the things we can do to help prevent those types of situations? Because by the time the police get there, we're responding to something that's happening. So let's talk about how to prevent that something from happening. Education is key. We have found through our Partnership for Safety program, through other IPP programs that we've had, where we discover that the more a community understands about drones, the more they see them as tools, as non-threatening, and not as a lot of media tends to paint them as they're spying on you and they're trying to peep in your windows or fly over your backyard. The more we can get people to understand the value of drones and understand the safety culture that's out there and understand how they fit into our economy and our industry, the more people will be accepting of drones. For a lot of people, drones are still new. As you probably know, Mike, when they fly overhead, they're not quiet and they sound very unique. I mean, some of them sound like you're about to be attacked by a swarm of bees, depending on the drone operating. So it absolutely grabs people's attention. It's typically a sound that they haven't heard before. Now this thing is hovering above them. It's got a camera, so they get frightened by it. We want to educate to eliminate that fright, that fear of drones, and for people to start seeing drones as a valuable asset to our aviation community. So education is absolutely key. We have a law enforcement assistance program within the FAA where we have people dedicated to working with law enforcement agencies around the United States to make sure that they're aware of the rules and the benefits, and that drones are here for good type mentality that we have at the FAA, so that they can get that into their local communities. We rely on our FAA safety team. We have over 200 drone pros, which are people that volunteer their time to educate the community on drones. And when I'm talking about community, I'm talking about their local community. So we're trying to do all this stuff up front so that we don't have those incidents. So the attacks aren't out of fear or confusion or ignorance or lack of knowledge or whatever is driving that person to be combative. We want to eliminate that. We completely understand the concern that people have with remote ID and identifying a pilot location, but remote ID is something that we need to move forward with safely, securely, and with community support in order to reach these goals of further integration. We want the FPV community to have beyond visual line of sight type flying available. Remote ID is our pathway to get there. It's not just designed for the big package delivery companies. This is something that's going to affect everybody flying a drone in the United States, with a few exceptions. We can talk about FRIAs and things like that if you want, but for the most part, it's a global, relatively United States type of rule. And there are reasons for it. And we need to move forward with it. But at the same time, we absolutely hear you. We hear the community on the concern for safety. You're not the only one that's brought this up, but it's something that we are looking at, we take very seriously, and we'll have to work together to ensure that everybody is aware of what's going on and that those types of events that you described are not okay.
Okay. That's good to know. It is, I mean, obviously, no one should be assaulted, period. Right. But even the misinformation, like I've had to deal with periodically, where, a friend of mine, there's somewhere around here, there's another individual that will fly a Phantom 4. And it one day flew over my neighbor's house, and he has 2 teenage daughters, and he was really pissed off because he was like, man, they're trying to look at my daughters while they're in the pool. And I just kind of looked at my friend, and I was like, no, he's not. I was like, at 200 feet with a super wide angle lens, he's not, your daughters are not going to be, they're just going to be, blurry pixels by the time he zooms in to see them. So it is very interesting to see what happens when the general community comes in contact with a drone for, not even the first time, but sometimes the first time they're uncomfortable with. So it's, and by the way, the number of my friends who have been like, I'll just shoot that thing out of the air, I'll get my shotgun. I'm like, no, you probably don't want to do that.
Not a good idea.
I do believe that's a federal crime. So, so that kind of concludes the compliance and safety section, and want to move on to the Drone Advisory Council and policy. One of the things that I am always a fan of, and that I have found provides a lot of value in my life, is kind of the follow the money. In the sense that, everybody, a lot of people want to believe in conspiracy theories, and that there's this nefarious group out there that they're going to control everything, right? And the point of fact is that most people are not that way. Most people are not nefarious. Most people do not want to control everybody else. Certainly those folks exist. But the idea that a cabal would form that's designed for that is somewhat far-fetched. Certainly not impossible. But one thing I have found is that oftentimes people are very motivated by money. And as a matter of fact, here in our capitalistic society, money is the end all be all for things like corporations. And so what I have found is if you follow the money, oftentimes you can get down to a motive. One of the big things that has been talked about quite extensively in the FPV community is that a large number of the folks on the DAC, the Drone Advisory Council, have a monetary interest in controlling the airspace. You've got Amazon doing delivery. You've got Google trying to do Google things. What do y'all do, first off, to address that in terms of how much control do they have over the DAC? And then also, how do you, kind of make sure that their interests do not override those of us in, say, the FPV community who we don't have the clout to be able to bring that kind of representation to the table?
Yeah, a really, really good point to bring up there. And with reference to the DAC, so I think it's important to understand that the DAC is not a rulemaking body, right? So the DAC is simply advisory. What they do is provide the FAA with opinions, reports, information that they feel would help us understand what's happening out there in industry. And we have a very wide representation of the drone community on that DAC, everyone from recreational flying all the way through, as you pointed out, some of the larger companies that are part of that. And that membership changes over time. I think if you've been following the DAC, and it's very easy to do, by the way, to follow the DAC, all the meetings are posted online, live when they happen. They're not secretive. They're not edited for content. They are streamed live. And then those recordings live on our YouTube channel for anybody to watch at any time. So the DAC is a very transparent, non-rulemaking advisory board that helps the FAA understand certain things that are happening out there and make recommendations. The FAA is under no obligation to accept and act upon those recommendations. We typically review them, vote on accepting them, and then decide if we want to enact different things and try to help out. But they do not shape rulemaking. So if somebody has an impression that the DAC exists to influence rulemaking and change the way the airspace is carved up, that's just not what's happening with the DAC. And I now would just go further to say our national airspace system is a shared resource. We all have access to it. Nobody's boxed out of the airspace, whether you're flying for Delta Airlines or you're flying FPV in your backyard. It's a shared resource that we all have access to. And the FAA has no plans to carve up or auction off or exclude or do something different to eliminate people from being able to fly in certain airspace. Now, that being said, there are rules to follow. If you're flying in controlled airspace, you need to have an airspace authorization. We try to make that as easy as possible through LANC, our low altitude authorization notification capability, where you can get near real-time authorizations. So there are certainly rules out there that restrict airspace use based on certain criteria, but generally there's a pathway through those restrictions. We've had drones operate inside temporary flight restrictions because there are pathways to get through and receive authorization to fly there. So going back to the DAC, the DAC's an important piece of how this drone industry is going to evolve with the cooperation between industry and the regulating authority, which is the FAA. But people shouldn't view it as something where the interest is money driven, where they're making decisions based on how much money they're going to make off it. Because I've watched a lot of DAC meetings, and that's just not how they go.
Okay. I've watched a few DAC meetings as well. They are incredibly captivating. As all government meetings typically are.
I think that's a broad statement there, Mike. But okay.
No. I'm teasing. It's I have watched a few of them, and it's very interesting to see what happens there, and it's also very interesting to see. I do know that there is actual drone FPV and otherwise members of the DAC, so it's very interesting to see how they speak. One thing, going back to kind of follow the money, there is a bit of a bad look that came out of the DAC. One of the members of the DAC was basically able to patent the remote ID capability. What do y'all think about that? Now, I know that typically in government, a lot of times you're ahead of the curve in a sense. But speaking of controlling, following the money, now, whether or not this person has nefarious means or not, I mean, it's, just stepping back. I don't think he does. I think it's more an interest in monetary things. But how do you combat that being such a bad look?
So another good question. So I think to answer that, we'll need to talk a little bit about remote ID and how that's going to evolve over the next couple of years. Because although the rule is effective now, compliance dates aren't for, we're talking 2022, 2023.
Sure.
So first and foremost, the DAC members don't have any inside information that the general public doesn't have. They're not privy to secret data or FAA processes that you yourself wouldn't have access to. And so it's not something that they're gaining a financial benefit for being on the DAC. They might be able to put it on their resume, I guess, but in terms of actual business acumen, things like that, the DAC isn't providing them with any special insight that people don't have. With respect to remote ID and patenting certain things, the way remote ID is going to work is there are two main components to the program or the rule, depending on your viewpoint. The first is going to be what we call a means of compliance. And the means of compliance is simply a document that the FAA will approve that shows how remote ID can work. Anybody can submit a means of compliance. You do not need to hold a patent. You do not need to hold any sort of insider business information, anything like that. Anybody can apply for a means of compliance. They have the FAA review it and approve it. Once that means of compliance is approved by the FAA, again, which describes how the remote ID is going to work, transmitting frequency, range, all that type of stuff that remote ID is going to have to do, then we get into which one do you want to follow? There's going to be more than one means of compliance for remote ID. I don't know what the end number might be, but for the sake of discussion, let's say there's 10. Right? Or there could be 20, I don't know, more. As a manufacturer of remote ID equipment, you can take a look at any of those means of compliance, which will be posted on our website, available to the public, and decide which one you're going to follow to manufacture your remote ID equipment. Whether that's a remote ID drone where it's baked into the drone itself, or it's a broadcast module, which is like an aftermarket add-on that you might have. Once you do that, then you submit a declaration of compliance. So that's the other big step in that, which says this drone or this broadcast module is remote ID compliant because it carries equipment that meets the criteria in the FAA approved means of compliance document. So somebody could be on the DAC and they could have a patent on something, or they could do some other type of remote ID work. It's not giving them priority. It's not giving them preferential or special treatment. The FAA is accepting means of compliance applications right now. You can go on our website, our Declaration of Compliance website, we call it, but you can submit a means of compliance to have it reviewed and approved by the FAA. Once it is approved, it's posted there for everyone. So everyone will be able to see exactly what your means of compliance, how you're going to meet that rule, how the transmission is going to work and the message components are going to work. All that will be available. So I understand that might be the perception that some people have. Well, somebody's on the DAC and they've got a patent and it's remote ID, so guess which one the FAA is going to pick? But that's just not how it's going to work.
Okay. That's actually very good to know. I appreciate it. With regards to remote ID and the actual technology that will be required, and this obviously is not for right now, but it would be good to have kind of a link or two that folks can follow if they're interested. So I'll pre-assume that we can get that, and it'll be in the description below. Okay. So, speaking of conspiracy theories, I have put forth my own conspiracy theory to completely invalidate my idea that conspiracy theories are not possible. And that was a while ago so to give you the background, I'm a mobile software engineer. And what was interesting to me was that there was this mad grab for spectrum, which is a nationally held thing that is public, but it is effectively licensed out to folks like AT&T and Verizon and T-Mobile, and they're pretty much almost all that's left now. And so a vast majority of the radio spectrum is now licensed to a small group of effectively corporations, and you're not allowed to broadcast on those spectrums because it is now illegal. Is there any consideration to effectively start fragmenting the airspace in such a way that, maybe Google buys the 50 to 100 foot airspace, and Amazon gets the 100 foot to 150, but they also have right away to land through the 50 to 100. Has there been any proposals for that? Has there been any talk of it in terms of selling off the airspace effectively?
Yeah. So let me just kill this conspiracy theory right from the start, because that's one of my passions, is killing conspiracy theories. There is absolutely no plan, nor are there any future plans or any current plan to partition off the airspace, to sell blocks of it, sort of drawing that parallel between the frequency spectrum and airspace access. That's just not going to happen. The closest we will ever get to doing something like that, and this is just, I see people's perception on it, which is why I bring this up, would be to say that, drones are limited to 400 feet. If you want to fly higher, you need a waiver, that type of thing. But that's not because we're capping you off, because above 400 feet, that belongs to Kevin Morris's drone company. No, those are all based on safety risk analysis and recommendations in studies and data and things like that. It has nothing to do with actually saving the airspace for someone. It's just geared to safety. So there will be no selling off of airspace, because I understand that I've referenced airspace as a shared national resource, and certainly you can look at the frequency spectrums, and we're getting slightly outside of my knowledge group here, but you can look at the frequency spectrums as somewhat of the same way, where the FCC handles that and licenses different bands, things like that. That's not happening on the airspace side. Although it seems maybe similar on paper, airspace and frequency bands are actually very different, and the reasons for licensing one and not licensing the other. So again, I'll go back to one of my first statements, which is our goal is to integrate. Everything we talk about, every business plan, every flight plan that we publish for our look aheads, everything talks about the safe integration of drones. And that's not just words on paper. It's not just government speak here in our conversation. It's actually what we honestly believe. There's not a person I work with in the FAA that doesn't want to continue the safe integration of drones. Nobody wants to segregate drones.
Okay. Thank you for addressing that. Like I said, that's one that I actually thought up on my own, and I was very proud of myself. And then once I finally sat down, really thought it through, I was like, maybe that doesn't work, because you can co-locating two photons in somewhat adjacent physical space is very different than co-locating two large objects in macro physical space. So,
that probably made a lot of sense to somebody, what you just said. I'm just going to keep smiling and nodding.
Whatever you said, Mike. Yeah, no, sorry. My wife yells at me about that sometimes. She's like, could you speak like a normal human? Thank you. Okay, we're just going to give up now. So we're wrapping it up here. I do want to ask for one more thing. The studies that you have referenced in terms of the safety decisions that the UAS Council is making, are those publicly available? And if they are, could we get links so that I could put them into the description?
Yeah, I will check and make sure that we have them publicly available. I know we reference them and we talk about them in details in some of those proposed rules, but I do want to make it easy for your followers, subscribers to get access to the information. So absolutely, I'll follow up, make sure you have the links to those types of documents, and we'll get them shared.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you, Kevin. This was fantastic. I really do appreciate it. Are there any other things you'd like to say, some thoughts to leave us with, or how we can get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. So again, shameless plug too coming in. Make sure you do follow us on our social media accounts. And I don't say that we don't get kickback or ad revenue, and we don't do, it's not based on followers, but as you probably remember, early on, we didn't have separate accounts for drones, and we sort of intermixed a lot of our drone content with our regular FAA agency content. Based on feedback from a lot of folks in the drone community, we split those two apart. And so if you want to stay abreast of what's going on with the FAA, and quite frankly, be able to reach us relatively quickly, because we monitor those 24/7, 7 days a week. Our communications department, I do believe we have some people that actually never sleep around here. So we're always on top of those things. If you need to get a hold of us, that's a great way. You can always email us at socialmedia@faa.gov, and we'll make sure we'll get to your question or your comment to the right person to connect you with somebody. But we want to help. We really, really do. We don't want to make anyone think that we're an agency regulating in a dark basement somewhere and nobody can see what we're doing. Transparency is key for us, and we do that through education, communication, and great events like talking with you here on your YouTube channel. Those types of things are invaluable to keep that conversation going, so realize that the FAA is really just made up of a bunch of people like you and I that want to do good things and help and grow this community, grow the industry, and certainly grow the FPV hobby.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kevin, for coming on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been on the Michael Rollins Show, tagging along with Kevin Morris from the FAA. Just want to give a great thank you to Kevin and all of his folks, because it's not often easy to face just even questions like these, especially when they could come from an antagonistic place. Because the FPV community is a little bit contentious, in case you didn't know. So thank you, Kevin, for coming on. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will catch you all on the flip side. Bye. So that was it. That was the interview with the FAA. I regret to inform you that after they reviewed all of my footage on my YouTube channel, I will no longer be flying FPV. And dude, I'm totally kidding. I really appreciate Kevin Morris. I appreciate him getting out there. It was really interesting, some of his comments regarding the FPV community in our pre-conversation. And one of the things he said was that it is really hard to reach the FPV community. And I do understand that. We are, for as much as we fight, for as fractious as we are all still a pretty tight-knit community. And there's a lot of people that I know that I probably never would have come across, and the only exposure I have is in the groups and the places that we hang out. So, I appreciated this. I will say that after the interview, we did actually sit down and talk about being able to bring some of the folks from the FAA out to somewhere in Middle Virginia that we can bring them, let them see what FPV is like. They, as a whole, have not had a great opportunity to experience it. Obviously, we would need to do that somewhere that it is very, very legal to fly. So, I may reach out to some folks eventually to talk about this and to do this. I think it would be a great form of outreach for us. And I think that it would give them a far better perspective of the things that we do. Anyways, I hope that y'all have a fantastic day, morning, afternoon, night, evening, whatever. And I will see you guys soon. Bye.